The Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with almost 100,000 members, the vast majority of whom joined in the last 7 years. Socialists continue to fight an uphill battle for relevance in America, but there's no doubt they've been having a moment for the past few years, almost certainly sparked by the sudden popularity of Senator Bernie Sanders, who I'll talk about later. The vast majority of DSA members, however, are straight, cis, white male millennials. It is decidedly white up in there. Now, not every American socialist is a member of DSA, but many people have made the argument that these lefties have a bit of a diversity problem. For some masochistic reason, I've decided to talk about that today. That's what this video is about. This video is sponsored by the Curiosity Stream and Nebula bundle. Nebula is a streaming video platform that is owned by the people who create content for it, so you know it's good. Hey look, it's me. I like to say that Nebula is kind of like YouTube, except with all the bad videos filtered out, leaving only the most interesting and informative videos from your favorite content creators, without all the annoying stuff like pre-roll ads or algorithms preventing your favorite creators' videos from showing up in your feed. There's also a lot of genuinely awesome original content on Nebula that you won't find on YouTube or anywhere else for that matter. We at Nebula would not be able to do what we do without the help of Curiosity Stream, which, if you didn't know, is a streaming service with a focus on entertaining and thought-provoking documentaries and nonfiction titles, such as the documentary The Birth of Shopping, which details how the creation of the first department store in the 19th century would cause a ripple effect, eventually leading to a worldwide economic phenomenon. Nebula's smart video essays and short films complement Curiosity Stream's brilliant documentaries so well that we've set up a deal where if you sign up for Curiosity Stream at curiositystream.com/T1J and use my code T1J, you'll also get access to Nebula absolutely free. And to sweeten the deal, Curiosity Stream is offering you guys 26% off an annual plan, which brings the total to less than $15 for a full year of both Curiosity Stream and Nebula. Click the link in the description to check it out. Hi, I'm T1J.
Follow me.
Growing up, my family mostly lived in urban, lower income, all black neighborhoods, also known as the hood. When I was a little kid, I just enjoyed life and played with my G.I. Joes or my NES, but over time, I realized that those video games I loved so much weren't pulled from thin air by my parents. They cost money. And although my parents worked very hard to give me and my siblings as comfortable a life as possible, I became acutely aware of the fact that my family didn't have all that much money compared to some other folks. And I wanted to figure out how to fix that, not only for myself and my family, but other people in the community. Trying to find a good job was a potential option. I could conceive of the possibility that not all black people were broke, but every adult in my community had traditional jobs, many of whom seemed very intelligent and hardworking, and they still mostly struggled and sacrificed. I was skeptical of that one off the jump. Now, when you're a young black boy in the hood and you're looking for black people to study and emulate who made better lives for themselves, you might recall that there's plenty of wealthy black rappers, singers, actors, comedians, athletes, and other celebrities. Some of those folks started out in the hood and found a way to get some white folks to give them a shit ton of money. And these folks weren't just living well, they were thriving and taking care of their families and communities and enjoying the finer things in life. As I grew older, I learned more about politics and the economy and government corruption and corporate greed, and I realized that it would take major systemic reform to even begin to tackle the problem of poverty in general, much less within the black community. Black people were never going to rap or slam dunk their way out of poverty. We can't all be Denzel or Jay-Z or Oprah, and we shouldn't have to be. Whether or not we get to keep our lights on should not depend on our ability to entertain white people. But the fact remained, that was pretty much the only solution to black poverty that I had ever seen work in real life. And that's honestly kind of still the case. Most tried and true methods of wealth production either require you to already have money, like investing or starting your own business, which is very difficult for most poor people, or they require you to have or be willing and able to develop a marketable skill that someone will pay you large amounts of money for, like being a great lawyer or athlete, which is very often expensive itself if you have to pay for education and training, and is arguably harder to pull off because it often requires a lot of good luck and being in the right place at the right time. You might be able to sing and dance just like Beyonce, but if your daddy works 2 jobs and your mama's old beat up car won't start, you might not make it to that important audition. The systems of building wealth in America are usually out of reach for poor and working class people, and often middle class people as well. And it's even more difficult for Black people who are essentially starting from behind due to America's legacy of racism and oppression. And I think it's clear that's at least partially by design. Rich people have demonstrated over time that by and large, they like getting richer, but they can't get richer if everyone else is also getting richer. There are a lot of resources available, absolutely, but it is still a finite amount. And one of the most valuable resources that wealthy people have is political power, especially in America, which has legalized unlimited donations to organizations associated with political campaigns and literally bribing sitting legislators. All this is utilized to mold the laws of the land, which, among other awful things, ensures that most wealth continues to be funneled to the already wealthy. In my opinion, this is one of the most problematic aspects of capitalism, and anyone who wishes to preserve capitalism would need to provide a cogent solution to this. But this whole time, in the background, there were these little voices, little hands raising up in the back of the class. Well, if this system is so bad and causes so much inequality, why don't we do a different one? No one really took these voices too seriously, and depending on what era of history it was, saying shit like that could literally be considered treason. But with the advent of the internet and social media, these voices got louder and more organized. And as political corruption and the obvious failings of American capitalism kept being put on full display over and over again, these people started to sound a little more persuasive. If Twitter were any indication of the state of society, which it is not, thank God, you might think these people were now the majority. But yeah, maybe we do need to do something different. The rising popularity of Bernie Sanders should be remembered as a pivotal arc in American history, in my opinion. Bernie Sanders is a United States senator who is known for his long history of championing socially and economically progressive policies like single-payer healthcare, free college, and workplace democracy. He ran for president twice, and although he failed to secure the nomination both times, his unexpected popularity was remarkable and unprecedented. It's not that his views and positions are so groundbreaking. There have been plenty of American political figures with similar or more radical views, and a lot of Sanders' policy proposals have already been on the books in other countries for years. But Bernie Sanders somehow managed to craft an unambiguous, uncompromising platform of social democracy and make the people of the United States, as well as the mainstream media, take it seriously. I don't know that anyone else had done that before. Like, for example, in 2009, newly elected President Barack Obama was trying to garner support for the healthcare bill that quickly became known as Obamacare. The main point of the bill was to expand access to health insurance. It didn't make health insurance free. It didn't even really make it cheaper for most people. It just made it so that more people had it, which I think is still better than how it was before. That's just me though. Obama and his allies had a lot of trouble selling this to Congress, even to Democrats, and they were forced to make a lot of concessions, notably including the removal of a public healthcare option, which would have provided cheap, if not free healthcare for those having trouble paying for private health insurance, and could have potentially forced private companies to compete by lowering their own prices or providing higher quality healthcare. Fast forward a few years and we've got Bernie Sanders hoping to succeed Barack Obama, running for president as a Democrat. And this guy not only wants healthcare to be universally accessible, he says he's gonna make it completely free. Obamacare this ain't. And again, Bernie Sanders is not the first politician to propose free universal healthcare, but I think he's the first American politician to make people take it, as well as a host of other progressive policies, seriously in a big way. A whole video could be done examining exactly how he was able to do that, little out of the scope of this one though. But there's no question that Bernie Sanders captured the hearts and minds of American voters and was a serious candidate that had a real shot of securing the presidency. And even though he failed to do that, his popularity definitely forced the Democratic Party to rethink their whole brand. To the extent that the second time Bernie Sanders ran for president, a surprising number of his Democratic opponents supported some form of free healthcare. And in general, many observers, including myself, would say that the Democratic Party has undergone a leftward shift since Sanders' presidential bid. But let's not get crazy. There's still the same liberal capitalist Democrats we oh so adore. Another very interesting thing about Bernie Sanders is that he openly identifies as a Democratic socialist, and he used that identification as part of his messaging while campaigning.
Well, we're going to win because first we're going to explain what democratic socialism is. And what democratic socialism is about is saying that it is immoral and wrong that the top 1/10 of 1% in this country own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
There's debate about just how socialist his actual policy proposals are. Sanders supported large-scale reforms to the American economic system, but he never quite suggested dismantling its capitalist foundation. But as far as I know, this is consistent with the positions of many democratic socialists who believe we should take incremental steps towards socialism, starting with practical reforms of the current capitalistic system. Of course, some socialists don't agree with this, believing that capitalism is evil and should be destroyed immediately. A common American trope is our misunderstanding and demonization of socialism. To be fair, socialism is an incredibly complex concept that's made even more complex by the fact that a lot of people have adopted it as part of their personal identity, which inevitably adds a layer of subjectivity to its definition. But of course, a big part of American discomfort with socialism is a carryover from the Red Scare propaganda that was rampant during and immediately after the World Wars, and has arguably been reignited through America's tense relationship with China.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
Americans are constantly told that all forms of socialism are evil and bad. We're never really quite told why. Evil is kind of just baked into the definition, kind of like fascism. We know it's bad even if we don't really know what it is. Either way, it's not something most American politicians want to be associated with. You could be the most neoliberal corporatist of all time, as a large amount of American politicians are, but if you say that the government should spend money on anything, you very well might be called a socialist, usually by Republicans. But Democrats have historically been just as hostile to the idea of socialism as Republicans are, most likely believing that it would alienate them from more moderate voters, and also because almost all of them are literally not socialists.
I'm not a socialist. I'm a mainstream Democrat, and I have been.
So Bernie Sanders proudly identifying as a socialist would seem to be political suicide. And let's be honest, maybe it did have something to do with why he ultimately failed to win the Democratic nomination. I recall the obnoxious discourse about electability. But it wasn't the huge blow to his esteem that you might expect given our political climate. Bernie Sanders made socialist less of a naughty word. Despite the almost fairy tale success of Bernie Sanders, there was one very notable and ongoing shortcoming that plagued him throughout both of his bids for president.
Throughout the campaign, Sanders struggled to match the support Clinton received from black voters.
The fact of the matter is Joe Biden beat Bernie Sanders by 40 points with African-American voters.
The core of the question is about, as president, what would you do with the rise of white supremacist violence to protect our communities?
Absolutely. I know I date myself a little bit here, but I actually was at the March on Washington with Dr. King back in 1963.
This man used the "I have a black friend" defense about Martin Luther King Jr. The political left is often accused of participating in identity politics, which essentially describes political agendas that are mostly, if not fully, informed by a person's race, gender, sexuality, religion, or other identity group. The modern Democratic Party in America has largely embraced identity politics as a core part of his messaging, and these ideas are generally mainstream in progressive culture. Republicans kind of also engage in identity politics, except they do it in a more dog whistly kind of way. However, a lot of people dislike identity politics for various reasons. Another thing about about which I can make an entire video. But one major assertion that some make is that identity politics misses the forest for the trees, that there are more fundamental problems that, once solved, may address many of the issues that seem specific to certain identities. Some people even go so far as to say that a focus on identity politics will lead to the entire collapse of society.
And so that's the fundamental danger of that group identity, victimizer, victim narrative, is that you fragment your identity in multiple dimensions. You'll find out that you're a victimizer, and then everyone's a criminal, and then everyone's guilty. That's exactly what happened in Russia.
And this is a frequent criticism of left-wing politics, but it's a criticism that also comes from within the left itself, and often from socialists like Bernie Sanders.
One of the struggles that you're going to be seeing in the Democratic Party is whether we go beyond identity politics.
Messages like this tend to be unappealing to politically engaged members of marginalized groups. It may feel as if they're being told that their concerns either aren't real or don't matter. And this was emphasized because almost every time Bernie Sanders talked about race, he found a way to change the subject.
And they are standing up today saying that we do not want young African Americans to be afraid about walking the streets, because they may get beaten up or murdered by police officers. But it goes beyond that. If you're looking at that generation today, those young people who are marching, my guess is 20-25% of them do not have jobs, because we're looking at massive unemployment today.
Yeah.
You're looking at young people who cannot afford to go to college or coming out of school deeply in debt. We're looking at 100 million Americans who have no health insurance today, despite the fact we pay the highest prices in the world for health care.
I talked a lot about Bernie Sanders, but this is a common aspect of socialist messaging across the board. You are quite frequently hard-pressed to hear detailed discussion about race and other identity issues unless somebody forces it into the conversation, and even then it's usually reframed through the lens of class. And socialists have been debating this for decades, by the way. This is by no means the first time the race issue has been raised, but it still seems to be a problem. Just ask the DSA. To some extent, this is to be expected. Socialism is at its core an economic theory, so you would imagine it would be economics focused. But when socialists describe their theory as being capable of solving social problems, which a lot of people would argue have causes and factors that are outside of the economic arena, I think that's where you lose a lot of people. And it's hard not to look at a movement that is so very white and not chalk this up to simply not understanding how racism works, because we already see white progressives do that shit all the time. This is actually a lesson I think socialists can learn by observing white progressives. Since black people disproportionately vote for Democrats and are black, I think a lot of people assume that the black community is super progressive and socially liberal, but you'd be surprised. According to a recent Pew poll, 68% of black American voters describe themselves as either moderate or conservative, a number that's stayed relatively the same for the past 20 years. Interestingly, the number of white voters who describe themselves as liberal has doubled in that amount of time. And I wonder if the influx of cringe performative white progressives who don't know what the fuck they're talking about is part of the reason that black folks explore other political ideologies. Socialists, this is your chance to not be cringe. One of Hillary Clinton's main attacks on Bernie Sanders in their battle for the Democratic nomination was the insinuation that he was a single-issue candidate. At a rally in Nevada, she told the crowd, "Not everything is about an economic theory, right? If we broke up the big banks tomorrow, would that end racism?" Rolling Stone called that the line that may have won her the nomination. Sure, it's a huge straw man and somewhat awkward coming from Clinton, who was fairly cozy with Wall Street bankers, something emails, but it does make a salient point that many socialists have trouble addressing in a compelling way.
It's really hard to I guess, present the kind of data and the kind of work that you're doing while simultaneously you're dealing with some of the most disgusting xenophobic and racist commentary and behavior from the right. So how do we overcome that to really share this message in a way that doesn't come across as dismissive of the lived experience of minorities in this country?
Yeah, $1 million question.
Now, inevitably, someone's going to read the title and then rattle off a list of prominent black socialists and black socialist movements. We can point out that many black leaders throughout history were socialists, like Martin Luther King Jr. probably, and W.E.B. Du Bois definitely, or how almost every socialist that's been elected to Congress has been a person of color. It's definitely true that racial movements are often informed by socialism. The Black Panther Party was a socialist organization, and critical race theory is heavily rooted in a socialist framework. And it's also true that the understanding of the intersection of capitalism and racism has evolved due in large part to black thinkers. In his pamphlet Toward a Socialist Theory of Racism, Cornel West, himself a black socialist, admits something that white socialists often fail to either notice or acknowledge: that although racist practices were shaped and appropriated by modern capitalism, racism itself predates capitalism. Racism is as much a product of the interaction of cultural ways of life as it is of modern capitalism, which is another way of saying that breaking up the banks won't end racism. West and many other socialists of his ilk believe, nonetheless, that although a socialist society will not necessarily eliminate racism, it's still the best framework for attempting to do so. I've also heard socialists argue that anti-racism is necessary for socialism to succeed in the first place, as the working class is unlikely to unite against class oppression if their identity-based oppression is being ignored. By the way, these two notions are kind of at odds with each other, right? Like, does abolishing capitalism come before or after diminishing racism? No group is a monolith, of course. People have different views, especially the left, which is known almost as much for its infighting as its actual political arguments. But there are, of course, black socialists, as well as socialists that acknowledge racism and other social issues as legitimate problems that won't immediately be solved by the formation of a socialist society. All that being said, regardless of what you believe, getting on board with socialism seems to at some point require a colorblind economic solidarity that may sound like a choice between, hey, let's work together on my thing first, and then only after that will we work on your thing. Or we'll help you with your problems, but only so you're freed up to help us solve the real problem. And black people have been dealing with Democrats paying lip service to racial issues while not doing a whole lot about it for decades. So a lot of us could be a little suspicious that we might once again be used as accessories for white people's goals. The point of this video is not really to analyze the merit of these types of philosophies, only to speculate about how they might sound to skeptical black folks, or perhaps people from other oppressed groups. Black people have watched white society, especially white men, thrive and experience this country from an advantaged position. So when an economic movement that mostly comprises white men tries to recruit and inspire black folks, it could come off sounding like, hey, we got to run the world for a long time, but it's okay now. We're ready to share. It's essentially a consolation prize. And maybe that's one of the things that needs to improve about socialist messaging in order to more effectively recruit black allies. If you ask Black America to describe the perfect utopia for themselves and their communities, I'm not so sure a lot of them are imagining sitting around the table, holding hands and sharing a juice box with white people who have silenced and subjugated them for the entirety of their history in this country. I don't think most black people want social or economic domination over other groups in the same way that white people have enjoyed, but I do think many black folks feel owed something from America. Do socialists generally support reparations for slavery? I'm not even really sure. Y'all can let me know. But I'm sure there's many viewpoints. Part of the argument for reparations is that it should eliminate the racial wealth gap caused by centuries of oppression, so it would seem like they would consider it unnecessary under socialism, because in theory there would be no wealth inequality. But socialists also like to talk about the value of labor, and another major argument for reparations is that it is a settling of a debt owed for unpaid labor. I do know that most black people support reparations. You could argue that in a society without economic inequality, people would no longer feel a need for something like reparations. But as I implied, I think it's about more than financial equality. Outside of that, I think a lot of black folks simply want an opportunity to flourish and prosper. We want to move on up to the east side and get our piece of the pie. We want our Wakanda. It's unclear whether socialism actually provides or even offers this. Now, American capitalism is pretty bad at this. I think a good number of people have figured that out by now. But as I said before, it's the only thing that we've seen do it at all. And ambitious Black Americans react to this by supporting liberal policies that retain those opportunities while slowly chipping away at the barriers that make them hard to achieve, and or developing and sharing ideas about the best ways to overcome the system with the tools we have available. And I don't really think you could blame us for that. I think sometimes we get stuck in our discourse bubbles and forget that most people are just ordinary folks just trying to survive. People understand that our systems are broken, they're not stupid. But people also have a limited amount of extra time, energy, and resources. And unfortunately, the people who stand to benefit the most from an economic reconstruction are often the people who have the least of those things, which is again, at least partially by design. And this is probably a big reason why movements like this, like most things, are dominated by high-income white people. This isn't to say that Black people hate socialism or are closed off to the idea of it. In fact, surveys have shown that Black people on average are very open to the idea of socialism. But the same surveys show that a lot of Black people still have a favorable impression of capitalism. So if socialists actually want Black people to show up at their meetings or join their revolution, they might need to do a better job communicating their commitment to treating racial oppression as a top priority and not a side quest, while at the same time making a clearer case for how American socialism can compensate for the centuries of oppression and violence that has economically devastated the Black community. I'm not sure if "you can sit with us now" is gonna be enough. That's just me though. What do you think? I want to give a quick shout out to the homies Bourbon Summer Cartoon Crisis, Gabriella Young Me 69, Casey Hillstrom, and M Mintz. Check out theonejanitor.com/discord to discuss this video in our Discord community. Okay, that's the end of the video. Stay Heiko, bye bye.